Did you know that SARS-CoV-2 virus can catch a secret elevator ride from your throat down to your lungs? And also, has anyone actually explained to you why the Omicron variant is at the same time more infectious and milder? Because that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Mikola Rashek of Neurogenomics, and in today's video we'll be talking about latest essay published by Dr. Bossche. We've introduced him before in our videos, and the reason why we wanted to discuss this is because he's one of the very few scientists that actually attempts to predict the future outcomes of pandemic. We have discussed that in the past with a couple of our videos when different scientists were basically discussing the future of the Omicron variant. And it's very rare that scientists attempt to predict the outcomes of the pandemic, which is, we think, extremely valuable. So we did want to study that information as well. So Dr. Bossche not only explains why the Omicron might be milder while at the same time more infectious, he then carries on with that explanation as to what might happen with the future of the pandemic. He even predicts the different shape of future waves, how big those waves might be, and even also how vaccinated versus unvaccinated people might be differentially affected in the future. However, we're not going to be discussing this at all in this video. If you're interested in that, come to one of our COVID Q&A events. Speaking of which, we have another COVID Q&A event coming up. So stick around till the end of the video to find out how you can get free tickets to this event, all right? So now let's get started. Now, while I said that, at the same time, I have to mention, if you've been following this channel for a while, you probably already know that sometimes we need to go through elaborate explanation of and give you some of the background in order to explain the science. So we'll have to do the same in this video as well. So in order for me to explain both why Omicron might be milder and the elevator ride, first I need to explain as to what is antibody-dependent enhancement. So there's different types of antibody-dependent enhancements. It seems we're going to talk about the ones that everyone else is talking about, which is the classical version. That's not the one we're actually interested in. That's the one that's a little bit boring. I do want to explain it for the contrast. At least it's not of interest to us for the purpose of this discussion or in this video. But what is the classical antibody-dependent enhancement? Well, it's in the name in a way. When we talk about enhancement, we are specifically referring to the enhancement of the disease. So when you produce antibodies, you produce both good antibodies and bad antibodies. Now the good ones are, of course, are helping you fight the infection, so they will help prevent the disease. But you can also have bad antibodies, those that will actually do bad things. And one of those bad things can be promoting infection. Hence the antibody-dependent infection. So in a classical version, remember, we probably have all seen this already. Antibodies are in a letter Y shape. Now the tip of the Y arms is the part that recognizes the antigen. In this case, the antigen is a spike protein, but underneath that is the stalk. Now the stalk is called Fc. And immune cells, they have receptors that can grab onto that stalk. These are called Fc receptors. And that's basically one of the ways how antibodies help our body fight infection, because the immune cells will grab on to the stalk of the antibodies that are coating the virus or any pathogen, and they will literally absorb the entire complex together. So they will absorb both the antibodies and the pathogen, and then they will destroy it inside them and themselves. So this is referred to as antibody-dependent cell-mediated cytotoxicity. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. So that's a process by which it's one of the ways how we can destroy the virus thanks to antibodies. Another one is a complement system. We're not going to talk about that. Now, when these antibodies and the pathogens are absorbed inside those immune cells, sometimes what can happen is the antibody will let go of the virus. And when that occurs, what you end up doing is you de facto end up infecting a cell, an immune cell. So that's antibody-dependent enhancement. That's the classical one. We've known about this one for a while now. However, in the process of this pandemic, we've learned a lot of new things about immunology, because there's such a huge focus, obviously, on study of this virus and what it does. And we learned that there's other non-classical ways of how antibodies can promote infection. So remember, I introduced a video where I discussed how the virus can latch on to the sugar molecules that are found on the surface of our cells. Well, there are apparently antibodies that can promote that interaction between the virus and those sugar molecules. So this is one of the ways of how some antibodies can promote infection, right? Another way is neutralizing antibodies. Remember, those are the ones that are like the best, because neutralizing antibodies, some of those neutralizing antibodies prevent infection by binding the spike protein at exactly same location that ACE2 receptor would be binding it. Now, ACE2 receptors are required for infection. That's how viruses gain entry into our cells. This happens, and I introduced this in our previous video, this happens because ACE2 receptors end up ripping off the head of the spike protein, and when that happens, it reveals these tentacle arms inside the spike protein that then unfold and grab the adjacent cell, and then they bring that cell towards the virus, and the virus ends up fusing with the cell. It's basically what happens, okay? Now, neutralizing antibodies, the same neutralizing antibodies can stop infection in our mouth, but the same neutralizing antibodies can apparently promote infection inside our lungs. So that's another example of antibody-dependent enhancement, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So that's basically the non-classical antibody-dependent enhancement. So now let's talk about the elevator ride, okay? That's not the actual official name, all right? So what happens is, just like viruses can bind to sugar molecules found on our cell surfaces, the opposite is also true, okay? So what happens is some immune cells can bind to the sugar molecules that are on top of the virus, specifically on top of the spike protein. So those are called lectins. So some immune cells have lectin receptors, and they can grab on sugar molecules coating pathogens. That's one of the ways that our immune cells can fight infections. But however, sometimes what that can do is that, in essence, a virus can hitch a ride on the surface of these immune cells, and these immune cells can then transport the virus directly from the throat down to the lungs. That's one of the ways, apparently, how we can promote infection in the lungs. Now, the paper that was discussed, it's pretty much the only paper that I was able to find that discusses this, and the authors of that paper, they were able to show how they use different antibodies in that study, and they were able to show that the antibodies that specifically were binding sugar molecules on the virus were the ones that were preventing lectins from being able to promote infection. That's how this was, one of the ways how this was discovered and proven, okay? So in that particular image, it was really cool. The authors show spike protein. The spike protein itself, remember, is a trimer, which means it's made up of 3 identical units coming together to make up the final version, the spike protein the image of which we see all the time. Now, in this particular image, they color-coded the trimer, and they basically used 3 different colors. One of them was yellow, light blue, and so on. The point is that the sugars on the spike protein, they color-coded with dark blue, and then they also show how different antibodies interact with spike protein. So in orange, they were showing antibodies that bind the N-terminal domain, some of those antibodies that promote infection by helping virus interact with the sugar molecules on top of our surface, though they are also binding in same location, N-terminal domain. Now they also showed neutralizing antibodies. Those are the ones that are bind to the apex, the top, very top or the very peak of the spike protein, same location that would be bound by the ACE2 receptor. They show that in a magenta color. And then the last antibody in like a light purple color, they were able to show that basically the antibody was binding to a sugar molecule on top of the spike protein. Those antibodies literally were able to prevent infection by preventing lectins interacting with the spike protein. Really interesting stuff though, but again, not much more information about that I was hoping to discover more. Now that's the premise behind why the Omicron, according to Dr. Bossche, might be milder. Because what happens is, remember, Omicron is a true immune escape variant, meaning it's the type of variant that can escape a lot of those neutralizing antibodies, the ones that are supposed to stop the infections, but you still have those were the good antibodies, but you still have the bad antibodies, right? And those bad antibodies are still kicking around. They can still bind the spike protein and promote the infection. And this is one of the reasons why Omicron ends up being more infectious, through this antibody-dependent enhancement, the non-classical path. But, and here's the reason why it might be milder, the same antibodies that are now binding to the spike protein that promote infection through antibody-dependent enhancement, or ADE, they are also now blocking interaction of the sugars on top of spike protein with those lectin receptors on the immune cells, and as a consequence, while Omicron becomes more infectious, it does not end up traveling to the lungs as effectively as previous variants, and it ends up being milder. That's one of the ways. Another way is, well, remember I did just mention that supposedly some of the neutralizing antibodies, while they stop the infection in your mouth and your throat, they can promote infection in your lungs. And you're like, what? Why? How? Well, this is one of the mysteries of this COVID-19, is that lungs don't actually have many ACE2 receptors. So why were lungs so disproportionately affected when they didn't have that much ACE2 receptors? And it's believed that possibly it's the neutralizing antibodies that stop the infection in your throat and your mouth might mimic ACE2 receptor inside the lung tissue and help to rip off that head. So it's all about certain balance. And once you have the head ripped off, if a cell now has spike protein on its surface, remember, the spike protein without its head can then subsequently start attacking a cell and bring it towards it. Remember, as I mentioned, spike protein, its real role is to help fuse with the cell, virus with the cell. And it does that by spike protein unfolding these tentacle arms, grabbing the cell, bringing it towards the virus, and then they fuse together. Well, if a cell expresses spike protein on its surface, then that spike protein, if it's active, it will then, and its head is ripped off, it will then unfold its arms. Those arms will grab adjacent cell, and the two cells, adjacent cells, can end up being fused together. And that's actually exactly what has been observed in the severe COVID-19 cases, where you end up having these number of different cells fused together, and they end up having multiple nuclei together. So this is referred to as syncytia. So that's been found in pathological studies of the COVID-19 victims, and that's possibly one of the reasons why this happens, is through those neutralizing antibodies helping to rip off that head inside our lung tissue. So it's all about proper balance of everything. Same antibodies that could stop infection in one area could supposedly promote infection in another area. Now, neutralizing antibodies no longer work with Omicron variants, so you also don't have that taking place inside the lungs. Another reason why the Omicron variant might end up being milder. All right, so this is fairly complicated, and then on top of that, Dr. Bossche also explains what that means for the future outcome of the pandemic, but we're not gonna talk about this in this video. If you're interested, then come to our COVID-19 Q&A events. If you made it this far, then we wanted to let you know, yes, we have another one coming up. If you're interested in free tickets, then the first 10 people who subscribe to our newsletter, we will send you free tickets. The link to this subscription is in the description below. Those are a lot of fun. Basically, we pull the top 10 questions and we answer them, and then it's open mic to the audience, and then we answer whatever questions you have. If we cannot answer, then we'll look what we can find in a scientific literature afterwards. So check it out. If you like this type of content and like this video, give us a like, leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel, most importantly share the video. This is how we grow, and we're definitely looking forward to seeing you in a future installment. Bye everyone. Hey, one extra video to let you know that recently we did an interview with Brendan Green of Let's Go Brendan Green podcast. And I did it with a couple of my colleagues, Dr. Gans Franz, as well as Charlie Fatal, who are experts in mental health well-being, as well as financial management, respectively. And together we talk about a package we recently created to offer to people in order to provide holistic well-being management from these three different angles. So we're talking about financial well-being, mental health well-being, as well as your physical health well-being through DNA mapping. That's my area. And if you're interested in this type of approach and what we got to say, then check out the interview. The link is in the description below. Also, we are presenting together coming up right away, and this presentation is specifically for business owners so that they can offer this type of package to their employees. And the reason why we wanted to focus on this, and we thought this might be a very good offer of value, is precisely because of the amount of trauma we all had to go through in the last few years because of the pandemic. Right. So then perhaps we can start being more proactive and mitigate some of those stresses by looking at how can we be as holistic with our well-being as possible. If this is of interest to you, then come to the presentation. We're looking forward to seeing you all there. Bye, everyone.